Today we're learning the first chapter of Isuri HaMizbeach, the things that are forbidden on the altar. Okay. They contain 14 mitzvahs, 4 positive and 10 negative. They are to offer to all sacrifices only unblemished cattle, not to set apart a blemished beast for the altar, not to slaughter such a beast for the altar. So not to set it apart and then not to slaughter, two separate things, right? Not to sprinkle its blood, meaning of a blemished animal, right? Not to burn its fat on the altar if it's blemished. Not to offer a beast for a temporary, with a temporary blemish. Not to offer a beast with a blemish even when presented by non-Jews. There's a couple of people are waiting to get in. Thanks. Not to inflict a blemish in cattle set apart for the altar, to redeem cattle set apart for the altar, which have become unfit to be offered up. To offer up a beast only when at least 8 days old, before then it is immature and not to be offered up. Not to offer up a sacrifice to the hire of a harlot or the price of a dog. Well, let's see what that means. Not to burn on the altar leaven or honey, to salt all sacrifices, not to omit or seasoning all sacrifices with salt. These mitzvahs in following chapters. Okay, it's a positive commandment for all sacrifices to be unblemished and of choice quality. So it says unblemished to arouse favor. This is a positive commandment. Conversely, anyone who consecrates a blemished animal for the altar violates a negative commandment. Now that you have an animal, it's blemished. By the way, the last 3 chapters were, yesterday was 1 chapter and today's 2 chapters that were previous. We're speaking about the blemishes of animals, right? So if it had a slit eye, like say, right, or the lip, or some other types of things that made it not permissible to be an offering because it's a blemished animal, right? So that's what. So all those designations of what's called the blemish were in the previous 3 chapters. Okay. So now we're talking about that. Let's say you wanted to consecrate, meaning you had an animal and you wanted to give a donation to the temple, right? So you can't give a blemished animal. You violate negative commandments, and you're even liable for lashes for consecrating it. You wanted to give, but you're giving something that's not permitted to give, right? Whatever has a blemish should not be sacrificed rather. According to the oral tradition, we learned that this is a warning against consecrating a blemished animal. In other words, it's not just you shouldn't do it, that it would not be sacrificed, but that you shouldn't do that. That's right, because from those words, it just means it won't be. Doesn't mean that you've transgressed something, but the oral tradition explains it as it's a transgression. According to the oral tradition, we learned even one who consecrates such an animal for the money to pay for libations is liable for lashes, for this represents a disgrace to the sacrifices. When a person consecrates an animal and intends to say that it is consecrated as a peace offering, but actually says as a burnt offering, or intended to consecrate as a burnt offering, but he said a peace offering. So he didn't say exactly what you meant. Statements are no consequence unless his mouth and heart are identical. Very important, right? It's not considered viable as an offering. What you meant in your heart, you have to say in your words. Therefore, if one intended to consecrate a blemished animal as a burnt offering, but consecrated it is a peace offering, or intended to consecrate a peace offering, but consecrated as a burnt offering, is not liable for lashes, even though he intended to perform a transgression. We're talking about someone who did it knowingly, right? Did it knowingly. If you did it unknowingly, so then you're never liable for lashes. Right? You're not liable for lashes. It's only when you did it knowingly and you were warned not to do this, then you're liable for lashes, right? So, but here he wouldn't be, because he meant one thing and said something else. even though he meant to sin. Right? So if someone thought that he was permitted to consecrate a blemished animal for the altar and did so, the consecration is effective and he's not liable for lashes. Whoa. Since he did not know the prohibition involved, his act does not minimize the holiness of the sacrifice. Since the consecration is effective, and since he did not act intentionally, not liable for lashes, or even takes issue with the Rambam on this point based on understanding of Truma concerning the labyrinth. Interesting. I find that fascinating. I'm trying to understand that actually. Because we said that if it's blemished, oh, gosh, so it's not, by the way, just because it's accepted doesn't mean it's obviously it's not sacrifice because it has a blemish, right? But what it means is it needs to be redeemed. Yeah, because it's because you can't use it.
Right.
So it has to be redeemed. And then with that money, you could, the temple treasury could then buy an unblemished sacrifice. One who slaughters a blemished animal for the sake of a sacrifice is liable for lashes. As I say, do not offer these to God. According to your tradition, we learned that there's warning to one who slaughters, right? Because it says offer. What does that mean? It means you slaughtered it. That's the offering. Someone who pours the blood of a blemished animal on the altar is liable for lashes. With regard to them, it states, do not offer it to God. According to your tradition, remember, I just to point out, which we've done many times, without the oral tradition, the written word of the Torah would be so confusing, and it could mean so many different things at times. Sometimes, it's very precise, and sometimes it's alluded to in a precision manner, but sometimes it's not. Like here, it says do not offer. It didn't say do not slaughter. It didn't say do not bring the blood, but slaughtering, slaughtering and offering the blood are part of the offering. So therefore you would be liable. But that's the oral tradition that is explaining those words, and they're not implicit in the words. Or it's implied in the words, not explicit. Not explicit in the words, rather. The explanation. The explanation, the oral tradition, yeah, exactly. And also, one who sets afire the selected portion of the blemished sacrifice on the altar is also liable for lashes. With regard to them, it says, do not place them on the fire offering on the altar. Okay, that says clearly, don't place it, right, when it's blemished. This refers to the fats. Thus, we can deduce that one who consecrates a blemished animal, slaughtered and poured it on the altar and set it afire, sexual portions, is worthy of 4 sets of lashes because he did four different transgressions at 4 different points. They didn't all come together at once. So therefore, you'd be liable 4 different, right? Potentially. I mean, you're liable doesn't mean you get it. Number 5, one transgresses the above commandments, whether the animal is a permanent blemish or a temporary blemish. He violates all of these commandments. As it says, do not sacrifice to God your Lord an ox or a sheep that has a blemish. According to the oral tradition, we've learned that this warning against offering an animal with a temporary blemish, for example, an animal that has moist skin eruption or a boil, it's going to go away. It's only temporary. If he sacrifices, liable for lashes. But since it's a blemish, it doesn't matter that the blemish will subside. Right. By the way, when it does subside, then you could offer it when it goes away, right? A permanent one isn't going away, but the one that's temporary will go away. But you offered it when it had the blemish, then you're liable. Doesn't make a difference that the fact that in a week it would go away. Well, you didn't offer it in a week; you offered it now. Number 6. The above applies not only to sacrifices of the Jewish people, but also sacrifices of non-Jews, Gentiles. If a priest offered such sacrifices of animals who were blemished, he is liable for lashes. It says, in the hands of a foreigner, you may not offer the food of your God from all of these, right? So in other words, it doesn't matter. Remember, it's the Kohen who's doing the offering, so he's the one who's getting the lashes, by the way, right? Not the Jew who brought it. Well, no, the Jew who brought it can also get lashes because he is bringing.
But it's the Kohen's responsibility to examine the offering to see if it's
Yeah.
worthy to be sacrificed. Because when it says one who slaughters the animal, that's the Kohen who's doing that.
No, an Israelite could slaughter. Can't bring the blood.
Oh, so the one who pours the blood, that is the Kohen.
Yeah, so that would be the Kohen. That would be separate. The one who slaughtered could have been the Kohen or could be an Israelite. And putting the fats on the altar, that's a Kohen, not the Israelite. So it could be some of the lashes would go to the Israelite because he brought the sacrifice. Some would go to the Kohen in that part that the Kohen does.
Could it be a case where both get lashes?
Again, if both did it willfully, knowingly, right?
Both of them too.
Yeah. Whether a conspiracy, I mean, that more likely would be in that situation. But yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely these things are happening,
Exactly.
right? Very unlikely. Because they're not putting themselves in a position they could get lashes. Like for what?
Exactly. But if it were to happen,
a person sins when they're going to have a great gain, when they're going to have a gain. But I mean, I guess there could be a gain over here, and that's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
But I really, you obviously that with Rambam, he needs to be like the furthest boundaries of what could happen. So the chances of it occurring it's
exactly right. They're the extreme boundaries, exactly, and therefore, exactly unlikely. Okay, number 7. One who brings about a blemish in a sacrificial animal, he blinded its eye, he cut off its hand, right? Those are just examples. There's, many of them. Is liable for lashes. Or regard to a sacrifice, it says you shall not have any blemish. According to our tradition, we learn that there's a warning not to cause a blemish. Okay? You can't cause the blemish. Lashes are not given for the violation of this prohibition only when the temple was standing. For then the animal was fit to be offered as a sacrifice, and the person disqualified it. Present age, by contrast, even though one transgresses negative commandment, he's not liable for lashes. In other words, if I say, here, this is my cow, and I'm offering it, I'm offering it as an offering to, so I can't offer it. So even if I went then and blemished it purposefully, I wouldn't get lashes because I can't offer it now. Okay. If a person brought about a blemish in a sacrificial animal, and another person came and brought it about a second blemish, the second person is not liable for the lashes. Why? Because it's already been disqualified by the first one. So just because you did more doesn't make it right. This prohibition applies both in regard to one who causes a blemish in sacrificial animals themselves, or in animals in which their holiness was transferred, the exception of firstborn or a tithe animal. In those instances, one who causes a blemish in an animal to which the holiness was transferred is not liable for lashes, for they are not fit to be sacrificed, as will be explained in the appropriate place. Similarly, one who causes a blemish in a ninth animal, which was mistakenly called 10th, is not liable for lashes, because the 10th is tithing, and if you called the ninth animal, you mistakenly called it the 10th, not liable for lashes because it's not the true 10th. Although one who consecrates a blemished animal for the sacrifice of the altar is liable for lashes, the animal becomes consecrated. So you consecrated a blemished animal, right? And you're liable for lashes for that, right? As we said, the animal is still consecrated. It must be redeemed after the evaluation by the priest. It then reverts to the status of ordinary animal, and the money should be used to purchase an animal, the same type of sacrifice. This law applies when the consecrated animal contracts a disqualifying blemish. In other words, you gave a proper animal, but then it became disqualified because it got a blemish. It needs to be redeemed, and the money is used for a similar type of sacrifice. It's a positive commandment to redeem the sacrificial animals that contracted disqualifying blemishes and cause them to revert to a status of ordinary animal so that one may partake of them. Just like we did with the redeeming of, today we had in Chumash, of Meiser Sheni, right? Too much to take to Jerusalem. So you redeemed it on money. Now the money is holy and the food isn't. Food you could use regular, but not money is holy. How do you redeem the money? As you go to Jerusalem and buy stuff there, that food becomes holy in the sense that you can only eat it in Jerusalem in a state of holiness, right? And the money becomes then again redeemed and it's ordinary. And that's what's happening over here. So nevertheless, whenever the heart desires, you may slaughter and partake the meat. According to the oral tradition, we learned that the verse is speaking about the consecrated animals that must be redeemed. Already explained in Hilchos Erechin, states with regard to an impure animal of which sacrifice should not be brought as an offering to God, you shall have the animal stand before the priest, the kohen, speaking about a blemished animal that have been redeemed. Okay. So what's the difference between the laws pertaining to an animal with a permanent blemish and one has a temporary blemish, right? Both can't be used in that state, at least. If the animal that was permanent blemish gives birth while it is consecrated, the offspring must be redeemed. It then receives the status of an ordinary animal, even if it is unblemished. The rationale is that secondary entity should not be treated with greater severity than the primary entity. If it became pregnant before it was redeemed and gave birth after it was redeemed, the offspring has the status of an ordinary animal. If the consecrated animal that was blemished died before it was redeemed, it should be redeemed after it died. The rationale is the holiness never encompassed the actual body, only the worth, because it had permanent blemish, and therefore you should redeem for its worth. By contrast, if one consecrates an animal that possesses temporary blemish, consecrates an unblemished animal, and after he consecrated it, it contracted a permanent blemish, different laws apply. If it died before it was redeemed, it should be buried like an other unblemished consecrated animals, because it must be stood before the court and evaluated, as we explained, and it wasn't. If it was slaughtered before it was redeemed, it may be redeemed as long as it's making convulsive motions before rigor mortis sets in. After this, you may partake of it. If it gave birth, the offspring may be sacrificed. If it became pregnant before it was redeemed, and it gave birth before it was redeemed, the offspring is forbidden. It may not be redeemed. What should be done? Before the mother is redeemed, the offspring should be dedicated in the same type of sacrifice as the mother before, because it may not be offered because sanctification of its mother, because the holiness came from sanctification that was suspended. Whenever a consecrated animal that was disqualified is redeemed, it may be slaughtered in the butcher's market and sold there after being weighed with a scale like ordinary meat. The only exceptions are firstborn animals and tithes. The rationale for the distinction is that selling the animal in the market causes the price to rise. Therefore, other sacrifices whose value remains consecrated, for they are sold, the proceeds of the sale are used to bring another animal as sacrifice. It should be sold in the market like ordinary animal. In contrast, with regard to the firstborn animal, the tithe animal, since proceeds of their sale do not remain consecrated, and so the animals may be eaten as ordinary meat because of the blemish, as will be explained. They may not be slaughtered in the butcher's market or sold there, even if the value of the firstborn animal was consecrated. It should not be weighed in the scale and sold in the market. The rationale is that one may consecrate only an article that has been acquired in a complete and total manner. Okay, let's stop here. All right, folks. Thank you.
Bye.
TRC today at 4. Looking forward.
Thank you, Rabbi.